And I will call the Common Council Executive Committee on Tuesday, February 23rd. In order, Lisa, can you do the roll?
Certainly. Alder Carter.
Present.
Alder Abbas.
Sorry, present.
Alder Harrington McKinney.
Present.
Alder Skidmore. Alder Hennick.
Present.
Alder Tierney. Alder Campbell.
Here.
And Alder Bidar.
He's going to be a few minutes late.
I have quorum.
Thank you. And can Stefan or Tanya go over the protocol?
Absolutely. Welcome to our virtual meeting. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. Members of the committee, if you're able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you're able, please activate your video when you're speaking. In this meeting, committee members are able to mute and unmute themselves. Please keep your microphone muted when you're not speaking in order to avoid background noise. Please use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. Staff, please use the raise hand feature when you're asked a question. The chair will do their best to call on committee members in the order in which hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. If you will remain muted until called upon, the clerk or chair will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the committee, please send it to the email listed on today's agenda. President Carter, the floor is yours.
Thank you. At this time, we'll go to item 2, approval of the minutes.
Motion to approve the minute.
Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and properly second. All those that are not in favor of me recording a unanimous vote, please raise your hand. With that said, I will record a unanimous vote for the approval of the minutes. We'll go to item 3, public comment. Stefan or Tanya, do we have anyone listed for public comment?
Yes, we do. First, we have Beth Falkos, registered neither support nor oppose, wishing to speak.
Which item?
This is regarding the report for tear gas. I'm not sure if I registered in the right place. I can hold if you'd like me to hold.
No, I just wanted to know which item. Thank you. Go ahead, Beth.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm in favor of accepting the Madison Police Department tear gas report as it is written. And I'd like to focus on one piece of that, and that's the consequences of banning tear gas in terms of emergency response. I'd like to go back to last summer, and one example of this is the city of Milwaukee as it was preparing to host the Democratic National Convention. When they banned the use of tear gas in the city of Milwaukee, more than 100 police agencies backed out of their offers to provide security for this event. Of course, the issue was moot because of the convention being canceled in person, but it's just an example of how that can go down. So if we have a dangerous or violent incident in Madison, we need to have the option of outside agencies coming to protect citizens and property here in Madison. In the case of the riots last summer, there were 3 nights when over 100 businesses and government buildings were damaged. In addition, multiple emergency vehicles were damaged, and rocks, bottles, signs, chairs, and other projectiles were thrown at police officers, resulting in 21 injuries. Law enforcement agencies from around the state were needed, along with the National Guard. And without these additional resources for extreme events like this, the results could be worse. So we need to keep this as a tool and continue to use it responsibly and carefully, and make sure that we continue to have this as an option for the police department. So I'd like to encourage you to please vote to accept this report and maintain that as an option. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. Stefan, who's next?
Yep. Next, we have Gregory Gelem, registered neither support nor oppose. Yep, there we go. Greg, you should be unmuted.
Go ahead, Gregory.
Hello, I'm speaking to item 6 in support of the PSSC recommendation to place the MPD tear gas report in file, reject the report as written, and reiterate support for a ban on tear gas. Please see the letter I wrote you a month ago regarding the tear gas report. The American Thoracic Society, the medical society of doctors that work on lung and breathing issues, has called for a moratorium on tear gas use, citing its long and short-term harms, and stating that its use during the pandemic is completely irresponsible. Moreover, there's a racially disparate impact, giving much greater risk of harm in people with asthma and greatly elevated risks of death in both asthma-related causes and COVID in the Black community. MPD's tear gas report is not an open-minded effort to consider alternatives, but that's not surprising since MPD is not a disinterested party seeking to write a truth-seeking report. This past year, the declaration of unlawful assembly in an attempt to sweep everyone off State Street with tear gas and pepper spray, precipitating rioting, was MPD's grossly excessive and ham-handed response when a few individuals broke the windows of Goodman's Jewelers. But rather than targeted enforcement against that small handful of individuals while protecting the rights of everyone else on State Street, which is what experts recommend, MPD went into Robocop mode against all, declaring unlawful assembly and sweeping all of State Street with tear gas and pepper spray, with many officers using these in violation of policy. MPD talks about using the Madison method, but many of the steps that David Cooper took when he was chief and would have taken now if he were still chief were not taken. As Cooper subsequently said, if you start using tear gas pepper spray, you've pretty well lost things, end quote. I've detailed some more appropriate approaches in my letter, including excerpts from Cooper's book, Arrested Development. As a ProPublica article, I included also notes, quote, experts say weapons that aren't designed to be lethal, from beanbag rounds to grenades filled with pepper spray, can make officers more willing to respond to protesters with force and less disposed to de-escalate tense situations, end quote. With regard to barricaded subjects, MPD has not carried out the FI Committee report recommendation to implement all of FICE principles for handling people in crisis, or to contract with ProTraining to provide their full training program for all officers to better handle people in crisis. I'll add that FICE principle number 7 states, quote, officers should take as much time as necessary to talk emotionally disturbed persons into custody, even if it runs into hours or days, end quote. Meanwhile, the MPD tear gas report says CS gas was used after, quote, negotiation de-escalation efforts have been exhausted without success, end quote. By what definition were they exhausted without success? Without MPD imposing an artificial implicit deadline for resolution, this assertion appears to fall. There are better alternative options if people are willing to look for them. Moreover, I hate giving MPD ideas for additional things that could shoot at us. The use of malodorants is one option with a barricaded suspect that MPD did not consider. The stench is overpowering and can force exit without respiratory hazard posed by CS gas. There are also options such as banning tear gas for crowd control and for all but the most serious situations, as New Orleans has done. I'll add that MPD included a statement in the report that they must have known to be completely misleading. They tried to cite Amnesty International as approving of tear gas, when in reality, Amnesty International has expended huge effort condemning exactly the kinds of uses of CS gas that MPD has engaged in. All the instances of tear gas use that MPD lists would be precluded under Amnesty International guidelines. And Amnesty International specifically has labeled the tear gas use at George Floyd protests in the US this year as abuses. Thank you for your time.
President Carter, you're muted. Yep.
Okay, hold on.
You're muted again. There we go. Now you're in. Oh, you were unmuted for a second there. There you go.
Yeah. Did you say, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Are there any more registrants?
There are no more registrants for item number 3 wishing to speak. There are, as you know, item 6 has registrants wishing to speak.
Right. We will go into disclosures or recusals. And I see there are none. And we will move on to updates. Item 5 for the PFAS plan is Deputy Mayor Christy Barmel. Oh, there she is.
Here I am.
Go ahead, Christy.
All right. Well, thank you. A few alders had asked that we come to CCEC and provide an update on what's going on with the work around PFAS contamination at the airport and the Truax National Guard base. And we'll be back here doing that more regularly as well. So just as a reminder, I know you know this, the PFAS contamination out there largely stems, or maybe entirely stems, from firefighting containing foams that are used to put out oil-based fires, jet fuel fires, for example. And they come from the contamination out there is I believe basically comes from two adjoining properties, one owned by the Wisconsin Air National Guard base and then the Dane County Regional Airport land. And we think it's likely there's contamination from a few different uses. One, the Air National Guard is the official fire department for the airport. They provide firefighting services for them, and they have some requirements to test their equipment regularly. They've changed protocols more recently, but until a couple of years ago, that included literally going outside, turning on the equipment, making sure it works, and turning it off. So foam is essentially escaped into the environment through that testing. As one major source. There has been the occasional fire that was put out there using foams, and then there are two fire training areas, commonly called burn pits, where essentially fire departments would practice putting out oil-based fires. The DNR has been active on this site in a number of ways. They've put out kind of the quote unquote responsible party letters, kind of basically laying out action steps they're requiring for mitigation and remediation. There is one to the Air National Guard for the contamination on their site. There is one to the county or the airport, county airport, because they have found PFAS coming out of their stormwater outlets. And which they suspect is likely, frankly, the county believes that is probably because contaminated groundwater is infiltrating into the storm, leaking into the storm pipes, not that there's actually a new source there. And then the other is the fire training areas, and that names the National Guard, the county airport, and the city all as responsible parties for those training areas, because at different times, the city's role at one time, we owned one of them until the mid-70s, and are believed to likely be a user and occasionally practice at those sites as well. Now, related to that, there's also impacts to Starkweather Creek that are presumed to come from that site as the major source at their headwaters, and we're all three named on the impacts to Starkweather Creek as well, because we're all named as people responsible for the contamination. So there's a lot of different parallel activities happening related to all of that. In 2020, all three of the parties collectively tested the burn pits to see and confirm if they were actually contaminated sites, and they are. That was confirmed. The next step there is to conduct further analysis to understand what that means in terms of groundwater flow. In some cases, we were able to determine kind of the direction and flow of groundwater, in some cases not. So there's more testing to kind of better understand how the site kind of moves this contamination around. The other was, we know the county was working to contain what was happening, trying to essentially try to line their stormwater pipes. So this wasn't work we were named on, it was the county's work, but it was going on at the same time. And I think that was highlighted in a news article maybe a month ago, where, like I said, their thought was that there wasn't actually a source being created through the stormwater pipe, but if the pipes are leaky and groundwater is getting into them, then that pipe kind of acts as a conduit to take water that was on the site and shoot it towards Starkweather Creek. So they were trying to find a way to keep groundwater from getting into the pipes, and they're still working on that. It's not something we're a party to, so we don't have that data, but my understanding is it's kind of like a test, tweak, test again, tweak again kind of operation that's still underway. Also, the Air National Guard, I think you're all aware that they, for a couple of years now, had been on a list for federal funds for cleanup of their base, and they have received the next step of that funding. They don't, because they're the military, they don't follow the state process for cleanup. They follow the federal process for cleanup. That's how they're going to get funded, and that's called CERCLA, and I should have looked up what that acronym means, but it's basically the process they follow. And they had started with kind of their initial investigation. The next stage is remedial investigation, which is essentially investigating to understand what the scope of remediation would have to be. They've got that funding. They announced that in January. They're starting that process, and presumably the next step would be getting funding for. So this is really good news. It does still take years. So it's not going to happen overnight, but that they're heading down the path is good news, because a year ago we thought we might be number 100 on a list of bases that are contaminated and need to be cleaned up around the world. So hearing that this is moving forward is good. Other news that came out in January was the DNR has continued. They tested. They tested Starkweather Creek, they tested the lakes, they tested the fish a year ago or so, they tested them a second time, and those results came out in January, showing that we do see some PFAS in Lake Monona, that impacts the fish, and they do see that going down the chain of lakes that flow from Lake Monona. Not north of, not Lake Windra so much, or Lake Mendota so much, but down from Monona through Kedanza, there's like there's PFAS. And so they essentially asked us, they essentially re-emphasized the work to stop the pollution while you're working on the long-term study and test and develop a mitigation plan. So as I said, that's work the county had already been trying to achieve. They said, okay, we need a deadline on that. We need a plan that's going to be, that you can show us and that we want to review and approve. That is now work that the three parties are getting involved in terms of how do we develop this plan to stop the pollution from getting into Starkweather Creek while we work on the longer term mitigation plan. Like I said, that's due April 16th, or I think I said that. So we're working right now to define what that looks like, and happy to report back when we have those results. Notes that go along with that, we have $50,000 sitting in the reserve of our budget, because even though at the time we were requesting budget, we didn't know what the work would be this year. We knew it would be something, so we don't know if that will be enough or not. So we'll keep in touch about that. And I guess in addition to that, another thing that was approved in the budget last year was some resources for the water utility to keep looking at well 15 and what they might be able to do to treat that. And that work is underway as well. So that's something we'll be able to report back on in the future. Are there any questions for me? I saw Alder Abbas and Alder Kimball's hands at the exact same moment, so I'm not sure who was first there.
Sorry, Alder Kimball, go ahead.
Sure, thank you. Could you be more specific about what elements are going to be in that plan that you're working on? What are the things, like not the plan itself, but what are the things that will be addressed in that plan specifically?
So unfortunately, I can't right now, because I think it's too early to say. I mean, the meetings we've had so far basically reference the world of technical options out there and start talking about a process for how you consider them, and how you hone in and narrow. And we've got a lot of work to do in the next 2 months to get further than that, but I can't say right now, because I don't think we've progressed far enough.
Like, does the full site investigation have to be completed before you can come up with those things, or?
Oh, I see.
Yeah, like what elements do you have to consider?
So if the technical folks were on the call, they would probably be cringing at my explanation, but I'll give it a try. I think I think there will be a long-term solution that's different than a near-term solution, because I think how the groundwater flows and moves around the site will really have an impact on whether you need to do something, whether you can handle something on the site, or whether you need to be filtering and treating the creek or something. Like, is there a way to manage it on the site, or is there not? And is it a $50 million solution or a $1 million solution? Does it take years? Does it take months? And I think having a better understanding of the full hydrology will basically inform that answer. The question is, how much do you have to know about the hydrology quickly to do something in the interim? So if it's a temporary solution, it's probably not the $50 million one. I guess I think the hydrology matters. I think the effectiveness and the provenness of it. I think the cost. I think the timeline of getting it in place are all factors. But I think, like I said, a technical person would probably have a much better answer. But those are the types of things that presumably we have to factor into the right solution.
So from your conversation so far with all the partners, has the National Guard said they've received funding to do the site investigation? Have they said when they expect they'll be finished with it?
They've not given a specific timeline. They have a website that offers kind of a path to follow. On that website, it said that the remedial investigation stage can take, I think it was, if I'm remembering correctly, it said like 2 years or something like that is typical, but this was like a generic, I read it as like your typical CERCLA process, not something that was tailored to what they were doing.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Alder Kimball. Alder Abbas.
Thank you for the presentation or update. Some of the question is already been asked by Alder Kimball. I have a couple of follow-up questions. So Christy, regarding action steps with DNR, I know DNR have NR 700. I'm sure in touch with DNR. What action items we are looking forward to take? And also, I also want to know if we are communicating with Truax, with Dane County, and either we are communicating those action items collaboratively, or this is something city is looking differently and county is looking differently. So if you could explain a little bit that would be great.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So the action steps are really right now more investigation work to understand the long-term solution and the magnitude and the scope of the problem. And like, for example, magnitude and scope, we know that there's contamination at the burn pits. We don't know how far that extends beyond them. We don't even know if they're hotspots. I presume they're hotspots, but we don't even know. We might find that the groundwater has circulated that much that we find, there's high levels everywhere. So we have a lot more work to do to kind of understand that and let that help us define a solution. So our next steps right now are that next step investigation and then this interim solution to at least hold the pollution on site and not let it leave the site while we do that longer term work. And maybe in our next presentation next time we're here, I could get somebody from engineering who can speak to this more from an environmental science point of view in terms of what these studies look like. In terms of what we're doing versus others, so this is, the county is really in the lead for their property and the Air National Guard is in the lead for their property. So we are collaborating and participating, but we're not in the driver's seat. So if there are consultant contracts coming out of these, the Air National Guard will hold them, or on the TRUAC site, the Army Corps hold on. The words in my head were not the words that just came out of my mouth. Let me say that again. On the airport site, the county, the DCRA would hold the contracts. On the Air National Guard site, the Army Corps is holding the contract. So they would be in the lead project manager position. Sorry for my barking dog. It's common in my life if you can hear that. But we're essentially collaborating, but we're not really the main driver of the day-to-day project management of these scopes.
And I know we are collaborating, and three of us are responsible party. We know there's a BAM technology, county spent $8 million. A lot of information is not being shared with the city and also with the community at large. So is there any effort to really engage them and get information and have an outreach policy from the city to at least city residents at the step of the process, what is happening, what is not?
I think there's opportunity for an outreach process to the city or to the public. We did do that when results first came out about Starkweather Creek. And then we did do some when the fish results came out and there was a new fish consumption advisory. And since then, we've really probably responded mostly to questions. We haven't gone out for more concerted outreach about it, but yeah, I'm happy.
Thank you. And the question is, I remember 1 year ago or 1.5 years ago, I was part of that listening session with water utility and well 15 and, contamination and numbers, 50 or 55 part per trillion, and then it increased and it shut down. At the meeting, they mentioned there was a question being asked, how much it will cost to clean up well 15 and if there is drinking water get really contaminated. And I don't remember the number. That was something in millions. Do we as a city know will cost us for the drinking water or creek, or is there any estimate around numbers?
Not that I'm aware of, but I know that study is going on this year, is going on right now of how could we mitigate or treat that well. So that work is happening. I will note that since that initial conversation, we've got more information from the Department of Health Services about what they would likely recommend as a groundwater standard. They are not putting out a proposed drinking water standard. They're putting out a groundwater standard. Well 15 does meet that standard. So the mitigation work we're doing would actually be to just be lower than that. This is an evolving area, right? You never know when standards could change. So we'd like to, we're pursuing the study and trying to learn about how we can filter and remove PFAS from that. But I just wanted to note that it is actually below those standards that were released or recommended, proposed, I guess. Not yet adopted.
Thank you.
And I have a question, Christy. Yes, I do have a question. In your presentation, did you mention the fire department? And I thought the fire department had switched to a non-chemical solution for their sites when they go out for fires.
They did. Thank you for that reminder. 2019 or 2020, they made the transition to foams that don't contain, that don't contain PFAS. So they have made that transition.
Okay, great. Thank you. And, one of the things that I forgot to mention, do we have anyone registered for this, Stefan?
No, we do not.
Okay, good. I didn't want to miss anybody. Does anyone else have any questions?
Carter, we do have somebody registered for agenda item 5.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yep.
Eugenia Maria Highland Granados, support and wanting to speak.
Okay. Eugenia, please speak.
Okay, can you hear me?
We sure can. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Eugenia Highlan Granados, not Eugenia, but well, it's okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just want to hear my name right. So yeah, I would like to speak. And I kind of like I put support because I really want things to start moving forward in the city. But after listening to the deputy mayor speak, I feel, first of all, I live in Eken Park neighborhood, who is one of the neighborhoods that is most impacted by all the environmental justice issue that comes directly from the Air Force around PFAS, F-35s, and all this mess. So my home, which is in 2742 Moland Street, was receiving water from the well 15 that has been highly contaminated and everything. And that was happening while I was breastfeeding my 7-year-old daughter. And so what I'm worried after listening to the deputy mayor speak is the lack of concern. It doesn't feel that there is really care of how much residents have already been poisoned and how the levels of PFAS that are not only in the Starweather Creek and the well 15 and everything, but it's all around right now in Madison. How many people have a livelihood of fishing here who get, like these lakes are already contaminated, like really trying to understand and to do more investigation and all those things. We have already been contaminated. The knowledge is already there. It just feels that all this bureaucracy about not taking responsibility of our health in trying to stop this from happening, this plan that is going to be put I don't know when. The construction in Truax is supposed to start happening really soon. And when that soil is going to be moved, we know the PFAS are going to hit ground levels and they're going to contaminate more, not only the Starweather Creek, but also the lakes that have already been contaminated. Our bodies have already been contaminated. I would really like to see the mayor taking more responsibility, which she hasn't. She has not taken really responsibility for our health. And this is an environmental justice issue. The communities that are being impacted are communities of color. If you don't have a filter right now in your home where we live, you know that you are getting PFAS in your bodies. And we know that that's cancer and that's gonna hit us in the future. If people don't have these systems, cannot buy water right now, are being poisoned. That's an equity issue. I would like really for the mayor to show more concern because right now the deputy mayor didn't express any emotional concern at all for what the residents are going through. I appreciate Alder Sayed and all the advocacy work that he is doing. I feel his concern. I don't feel any concern from the mayor. So I really would like to call out the mayor to actually show up for the residents, even from her own neighborhood, and to please send people who actually understand the significance of the contamination that has been happening for years and to show emotional concern. And this is a real issue. This cannot wait. And who is going to be paying for it?
I just wanted to interrupt and let you know that the 3 minutes are up for speaking. I know we have several people on the list to speak tonight. So this is Lisa Veldr from the staff. I will be timing people for 3 minutes, but you can't hear my timer. So I will have to interrupt the testimony and let you know that your 3 minutes are up. So.
Okay, thank you for that. I will say that we are all concerned about PFAS, and I will also say that Alder Abbas and Alder Kimball, and I'm sure there are some others that are really at the epicenter of this fight, that we are all concerned about it. I mean, water contamination is very important and very vital, and we don't want to be Flint, Michigan. And if Alder Abbas and Alder Kimball want to say something, that's up to you, or Deputy Mayor, if you want to come back with another statement, that's okay too.
I guess I would just, point taken that I was kind of giving a progress report and reporting on work in progress, and perhaps was a little dry in my delivery of. I would echo what you said, President Carter. I think we are all concerned. Environmental contamination is an issue. Cleaning it up is never simple, and that doesn't mean it not being easy and fast. It does not mean it's not concerning and that we aren't focused on it. But point heard, it's not come across that way. So I will take that feedback back. On one technical point, and I'm not the expert on the details here, but when it comes to any future construction, I did not mention this. The DNR has required Truax to manage any dewatering and any soil related to future construction on the site for PFAS. That is something that's on everybody's radar, and they are kind of mandating that all be basic. Anything that leaves the site be treated. Any water that leaves the site from that be treated as well. So I just want to let you know that, and there's plenty of efforts that I didn't really focus on, like President Carter mentioning getting off of those firefighting foams, like being a leader in the state and testing our drinking water and making sure we're in compliance. That I think are also efforts. Everything is too slow and everything's unsatisfactory when it comes to pollution. I hear that because it's something that we shouldn't have to live with, but we do at the moment. But I didn't mean to come across so dry as to suggest we don't care, but I will take that feedback back.
Thank you. And the fight continues, and I think I will speak for everyone to say that we will continue that fight. We will go on to item 6. And is there anyone registered for item 6?
Yeah, there are quite a few people registered to speak for item 6.
Can we do public comment first?
Okay, so Mia Masak is registered first to speak, registered opposed. Mia, sorry, you should have a prompt to unmute yourself. There you go, should be unmuted.
Hi, yes, it's Mia Masak, thank you.
Go ahead.
Can I go ahead? Okay, thank you. So this summer, I had the pleasure in being tear gassed. And although the excuse as to why would likely fall under categorization of quote unquote unlawful assembly, or as I like to call freedom of speech, exercising an amendment right, participating in our supposed democracy because we live in a free country. But unfortunately, at this point in history, most of those words above are in quotations, because they do not now, nor have they ever truly existed. The experience was not enjoyable. For the record, neither are rubber bullets, though it's fortunate that was the heightened extent of this occasion, because that's most certainly not always or even ordinarily the case. It was interesting to have witnessed the lack in militarization enforcement up until, of course, it was a matter of commercial property damage, as opposed to that same outrage directed at the loss of lives that these actions were in response to. The sheer, utter, and gutless disregard for justice is so much more violent than some shattered glass. These were mere demonstrations that what should and needs to take precedence is that our community has been broken over the all too common occurrences of Black and brown brothers and sisters' bodies being harmed and unrightfully taken before their time. Where were these options, such as tear gas, prior to Tony Terrell Robinson Jr. being shot 7 times in a matter of moments? May he rest in power, almost 6 years ago now, yet his killer still walks free. Whereas Jacob Blake, who's in my thoughts and prayers, is now paralyzed after being pierced by 7 police-induced bullets himself. Or how about all the other names that are far too many? A temporary roadblock, traffic block, is not more important than acknowledging the permanent pain, hurt, suffering, trauma, and the treating others the way we'd like to be treated seems to only be applied when it suits us. These are our, and we are each other's human race family, thereby sharing a joint and collective responsibility to own up to the blood that is on our streets, and until the day we see liberation remains on our hands as well. How is a gathering such as this, in regards to how it's acceptable to inflict harm, appropriate? While the basic needs of the people continue being disregarded and ignored, we must ask ourselves, what side are we on? I yield my time. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Next, we have Charles James, registered in support, wishing to speak. Charles, you should have a prompt to unmute yourself. There you go.
Thank you.
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. I know what tear gas smells like, if smell is the correct word. In the 1970s, at the height of the protests against the Vietnam War, I smelled tear gas several times. It was not pleasant. However, since then, I have rarely heard of tear gas being used on a regular basis anywhere. There are strict guidelines in place as to who is authorized to use it and when. Here's what I know about the issue as it applies to the Madison Police Department. The MPD has managed hundreds of protests without having to resort to tear gas. It is important, however, to have that option available with the following observations. Tear gas has been deployed in just 2 situations involving large crowds in the past 30 years, where behavior has escalated to include significant violence, looting, or property damage. Tear gas deployment in these situations is typically accompanied by a declaration of unlawful assembly, which is defined as an assembly which causes such a disturbance that it is reasonable to believe that it will cause injury to persons or damage to property, unless it is immediately dispersed. Before tear gas is deployed in a crowd control context, standard operating procedure is to give public notice of unlawful assembly over a loudspeaker with an opportunity to disperse wherever possible. In addition, tear gas use is limited to SWAT and special events teams. It is not available to regular patrol officers. Any officer involved in any use of force involving any device or chemical agent must submit a report of why, how, and how much of it was used. These reports are public record. I don't understand why this is an issue. Tear gas is just one of many tools the MPD has at its disposal to deal with extreme situations, which again occur very rarely. There are mechanisms in place to make sure that tear gas and other instruments available to the MPD are not abused. I support the report under consideration at this meeting. Thank you.
All right. Next, we have Judy Bluel. And Judy, you should have a prompt to unmute yourself. There you go.
In an ideal world, we would have no need for tear gas, but we're not in an ideal world. Large crowds can turn fast, as we saw last summer, when peaceful protests during the day sometimes morphed into violence and destruction in the later hours. At one of your previous meetings, Chief Wall was asked if tear gas and impact projectiles were not available, what other options would he have? He answered, wood batons, tasers, firearms, and our empty hands. The report lists a couple of additional options, like deploying officers with bicycles to form a line and move a crowd, but that's a pretty physical option. As the report shows, tear gas has been deployed very few times over the past 30 years, but its use has been critical to resolving high-risk incidents without injury and without the need for deadly force. A large unmanaged crowd can become a threat to public safety in a hurry. Tear gas is the best and safest tool for Madison Police Department for maintaining safety and security for our residents. Please accept MPD's tear gas report. Thank you.
Okay, next we have Wendy Reichel, registered, neither support nor oppose. Wendy.
Good evening. Please vote to accept MPD's tear gas report. As you read in the report, the department has used tear gas just 11 times in the last 30 years. And in all but in 2 of those instances, it was used to resolve a barricaded subject incident in order to protect the public after all other tactics had been exhausted. While today's vote is simply to accept or not accept the report, there are indications that a tear gas ban is still not out of the question for this council or the next one. Our city experienced more than 180 consecutive days of protests from May into December last year. MPD staffed a daily command post with officers designated to assist with those protests using the department's philosophy on crowd control, the nationally recognized Madison method, which stresses remaining impartial, protecting individual rights while ensuring public safety, and protecting people first and property second. During those 180 days of protests, tear gas was used only during a 3-day span when there was arson and gunfire, more than 100 downtown businesses and government buildings damaged, and 21 officers injured when they were pelted with projectiles. The vast majority of the rest of those 180 protest days were uneventful, with little or no need for police intervention. Over the last year, we've been continually reminded that we don't know for sure what the next day will bring. Did you expect to experience a global pandemic, or watch the nation's Capitol building come under siege by rioters, or even witness all the damage to the businesses and buildings that occurred downtown in Madison last summer? Because we have no idea what the next threat to public safety will be or how it will unfold, and because there are currently no favorable alternatives to tear gas for when chaotic violence breaks out, please ensure that our police department can continue to keep this tool as a last resort. Thank you.
All right. Next is D. Wynne or Winnie, registered neither support nor oppose. You should have a prompt to unmute yourself.
Hi, it's Wynne. I believe it's important that you accept MPD's tear gas report. As you know, the report shows that how tear gas has been utilized in the city of Madison over the past 30 years. In 10,000 plus days, MPD has resorted to using tear gas only 11 times, twice for crowd control purposes, once during Freak Fest back in 2002, and then this past summer under very intense circumstances. The other 9 times it was used was to help safely extract a barricaded person who posed a threat to themselves or others. We tend not to hear about these uses. One example happened to involve an individual that was barricaded in a hotel room who was actively firing a handgun. After the suspect refused to exit and threatened to shoot, MPD SWAT responded to assist and eventually deployed CS into the room, which resulted in the suspect exiting before further harm could take place. A ban on tear gas will result in far more negative consequences in high-risk situations like this, putting even more people's lives in danger. Please remember, while the use of tear gas has been infrequent in the city of Madison, it has been and it remains to be a critically important option for resolving certain high-risk incidents. Thank you for your serious consideration. And again, I strongly encourage you to accept MPD's report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Bonnie Rowe, registered in support.
Good afternoon. The insurrection at our nation's capital on January 6th paints a picture for why we need tear gas. Violent rioters showed up to do calculated violence. The police were overpowered by an unruly mob and the Capitol breached while lawmakers were certifying election results. This conversation we need to have is what happens when every other means of de-escalation has failed and a crowd of people is bent on causing violence and destruction. The report shows this has not happened frequently. Of hundreds of protests carried out in 2020, only a few had elements that got out of control. What do we want our police to do then? We need to be practical and realistic. There needs to be an effort to understand the tools needed. Police officers can't do the jobs we pay them to do while being pelted with water bottles, baseball-sized rocks, and chunks of concrete, and their squads burning in our streets. They cannot be left defenseless. For all residents to thrive, we need peace on our streets. Some cities that have recently banned tear gas have walked those back to restrictions instead of outright bans, restrictions that we already have in place here through standard operating procedures. Tear gas should be a tool of last resort. It should have restrictions and oversight, but tear gas is a better option for dealing with a large-scale violent crowd than having our officers go hands-on with residents or have to resort to closer in or more lethal options. I worry that a knee-jerk reaction to a couple incidents will put our residents and our officers in a dangerous place. Please accept MPD's tear gas report. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Kim Richman, registered in support.
Thanks, Effin. Good evening, President Carter and the entire Common Council Executive Committee. I'm in total support of the MPD report regarding tear gas use, and I request the committee and the council accept that report also. There are fiscal concerns in our city that weigh in on this issue. The first night tear gas was deployed last summer began when Goodman's Jewelers was looted. That establishment holds a special place in my heart since my father was lifelong friends with the Goodman brothers. I was totally upset with that, and that started it. With more than 100 other buildings damaged, without the tool of tear gas, how much worse could it have gotten? What are the alternatives? Banning tools like tear gas leaves residents and business owners vulnerable to attack. Also, there were several businesses owned by people of color and immigrants, and they were unable to recover from the severe damage to their businesses. No serious business entrepreneur would want to start a business on State Street if tear gas is banned and people are not assured that their police department is able to keep the peace and the property safe from destruction. To be a desirable city to live, work, and play in, we need our police departments fully supported with all the tools necessary and fully resourced to carry out the duties we expect of them. Only then can all the members of the community thrive. And remember, you've heard it 3, 4, I don't know how many times tonight. Before the rioting and looting this past summer, tear gas was only used one time in 30 years, and that was Halloween in early 2000s. Thank you, be well, stay safe. Kim Richman, District 16.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Benji Ramirez Gomez, registered opposed. Benji, you should have a prompt. There you go.
Thank you. Yeah, I am signing up to speak in opposition of accepting this report from MPD. To paraphrase a comrade who spoke at the Police and Fire or the Public Safety Review Committee, to accept a report from an abuser on the abuse that they perpetrate is fundamentally flawed. Right now, witnessing the harm that MPD has committed against our communities, how can we expect to trust them? How can we be put in this place where we are prioritizing their word over the word of members who were tear gassed, over the word of innocent bystanders who were in their homes sleeping who got tear gassed? Why is it that we are allowing and facilitating the use of chemical weapons, of weapons of war in our own city against our own neighbors? When I listen to the people talk about accepting this report, they are for the criminalization of protesting. They are, when I listen to them talk and spin this narrative of rioting and looting, they are erasing the entire history of why people are out in the streets in the first place. And so when it comes to this report, it's already incomplete and completely debased. It's not factual. This report presents more opinion than it does nonfiction. And so when I read this, and when we are actually starting to construct a thoughtful and concise opinion on the matter, and we're presented with this document, how are we not supposed to take the side of the oppressor when all the data in this report points to the fact that there's just a complete and nullification of the lived experience of the people who have been victim to CS. There just isn't, it doesn't make sense. And so I urge the Common Council Executive Committee to follow the example of the Public Safety Review Committee in reiterating support for the ban on chemical weapons in our city, and to reject this document that just doesn't point to any actual lived experience. I understand that the police officers do have a difficult job, but the scrutiny is well warranted right now. And how dare some people elevate this idea of the Madison way when that way was broken? That practice and protocol was broken.
I'm sorry, but the 3 minutes are up for this speaker.
Thank you. Thank you, Benji. Our next speaker, and how many do we have left?
I'm not exactly sure, maybe 12-ish.
Okay. Go ahead.
13 speakers left, Council President Carter. The next speaker is Jeremy Ryan of opposing and wanting to speak.
Yeah, I would like to request the ability to have video so people who are hard of hearing can see. It's been since March, it's almost a year now without video, and the progressive members of this board aren't doing anything to make these meetings accessible. So I'd like to request video be allowed so people can read my lips.
Thank you for your request. We have addressed that issue with you, Jeremy, before at many council meetings. So if you have a statement on item 6, please go ahead.
Yeah, I do. I mean, just when it was addressed as though you were working on it, but I guess you're not. Nobody is. So either way, as far as tear gas goes, not a single person who's spoken in regards to this report for it was actually there any of those nights. Anyone who was there those nights will tell you that the tear gas, that no buildings were destroyed. There wasn't violence until after the tear gas was deployed. And I actually, on the second night, the first night of the curfew, I have a live stream from the minute the curfew begins to the time everyone is dispersed and left. And you can clearly see that they tear gassed us 12 times before a single window was broken. And you see the first window get broken, but we had already been pushed all the way down Wisconsin Avenue for no reason with tear gas. The police cannot use tear gas, and we don't even let police investigate themselves in use of force cases. How are we going to let the police have the authority to say what is right and what is wrong with tear gas? And I also want to call out the council for constantly bringing this up. You're playing the county's game, like the same thing they do with the jail, where every time people come out and they speak against it, and you just cannot take the will of the people. So you just keep pushing off further and further until finally maybe you can get enough people who are paid or enough people who are whatever to come and speak for it. And maybe the other people who have been speaking out against it all these other times might get a little tired. And I see what you're doing, but you're circumventing the will of the people with this. We've already been over this countless amounts of times. Every time more people are for banning tear gas than anything else, and you guys still do it. Like, what the fuck are you guys doing?
Jeremy, I would appreciate you not using profanity, and your time is up. Next.
Sorry, Alder Carter. The next speaker is Larissa Joanna, opposing and wishing to speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. I think I echo that the over and over again, like this is not should be even an argument. We must ban the use of tear gas. There is no reason why we should allow it to do more than what they do already. I don't know if you have access to all of these live videos that are out there in Facebook, videos on every social media of how the protests through the summer were happening. And nothing was broken, nothing was damaged until the police started inciting this violence. They started tear gassing people. They started physically attacking them. It is ridiculous that you are not addressing the real problem, that you are not listening to the peaceful demands from people that it's tired of this systemic racism that we continue to see that brutalize our communities more and more and more. And the use of tear gas only brutalize more those peaceful protesters, including children. We must ban the use of tear gas during, because this is a residence zones too that we are talking about, that where the tear gas is being used. I live a couple blocks away from State Street, and I had to cover my windows, cover my AC during summer because my children wasn't at home smelling and getting all of the side effects from this tear gas. And we were not even out in the streets. So let alone those children that were out in the streets with their parents, not even protesting, because there was plenty of pedestrians in the street as well. Plenty homeless people that it's already in the community downtown that was affected over the summer for the use of tear gas. We must do better. We must listen to the actual problem and fix those things instead of continue to attack our communities with all of these chemical weapons, all kinds of weapons that we keep providing the police when the police does not serve or protect anyone. We need to fire Matt Kenny. We cannot. Those are the issues that we need to be focused on, not the use of tear gas. The police cannot investigate themselves and say, yes, it's okay for us to use it on the community. We cannot allow that. We are the people who put you in these positions to do your job, to listen to the demands. We are not here asking for anything bigger than basic, bare minimum protections to our communities. And the use of tear gas is a chemical weapon that has damaged not only physical, but many other mental and many other health in many people that I know that was out in the summer, not even protesting, but just working on State Street. Homeless people that are regularly.
The 3 minutes are up for this speaker.
Thank you. Next speaker.
I'm probably going to say this incorrectly, but Ankita Baharwa.
Hello all, my name is Ankita Bharadwaj.
Thank you.
Yeah. I only speak for myself, and even though I'm on the Police Civilian Oversight Board, I do not speak for the board. I speak only for myself. I feel like we have talked about this so many times that at this point, it just feels so repetitive, and I just don't know what else to say that will convince the people of Madison who are advocating for tear gas that this is the wrong way to go. I have asthma, right? And I have this asthma specifically after last summer where I was tear gassed. I now use steroid inhaler twice a day. Out of my pocket, I have to pay for it. Also, we know that we are living in a pandemic, and COVID only makes your lungs worse. On top of that, being subjected to tear gas is not in the favor of public health. And also the point about being punished without a due process. People who are protesting have not been tried in the court of law. You or anybody else, including the cops, do not have the right to punish them or hurt their body that does not belong to them because, again, we live in a free society, right? Without due process like that. It has also, as I said before, entered people's houses. I live on a co-op on the Langdon Street, right? And during the times when there were protests, the tear gas entered our house, and we had 2 babies in our house who were sleeping. It was like 2 a.m, and they woke up and they said, "Why are we being punished? Why are we being tear gassed?" Their mom had to tell them that this is what happens, that this is how the system works. Imagine telling that to a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. And if I'm just really confused that if the police says that the goal is to build a bridge, then is this how they're going to build a bridge between the community and the cops? By using tear gas on us? I don't understand the logic behind it. It caters to the hostility between both the parties. Ultimately, the question is, do you value life more or do you value money more? In Hindi, we say, "Paisa haath ka mail hota hai," which means money is like dirt on your hands. You're going to get it again. But lives once affected or so miserably or lost won't come back. And you know who valued money over life? Colonizers, people who own slaves. Do you want to be like them? Plus, if tear gas is so harmless, why aren't civilians allowed to possess them and use them like we are allowed to use guns? Why? The goal should be to encourage democracy, not crush it by using the threat of tear gas if the people want to practice their rights guaranteed to them under the Constitution. Please know only rich folks or white folks are not affected by it because they can afford to not protest, to be apolitical. Therefore, it's racist and economically unjust to use tear gas. At this point, I feel it's absolute politics to keep discussing it, to see how many times before we stop coming to testify, how many times before we are silenced, how many times before we give up hope. Please listen to people who were tear gassed. Please listen to those of us who were affected, who are innocent. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Fabio Mora Arita.
Fabio, you should have a prompt to unmute yourself. There should be a prompt somewhere on your screen.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep,
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Well, I'm going to use the opportunity that I'm almost at the end of the list and I was able to listen to different sides of this to try to convey into something. Very rarely we are able to discuss with people politely about things that we're completely in disagreement. And I'm not going to try to convince. I welcome the people who speak against the use of tear gas, but I hang out with them most of the time. So I'm not going to try to convince the people who is pro use of tear gas, but I'm just going to, hopefully they still on the line and they could hear this. And I think we might have something in common. I think what we both sides are looking here is for a better community, right? Let's assume that for a second. And one side is saying, in order to have a better community, we have to give the police the resources that in case of someone goes out there and break a window, we can tear gas them. And the other side is saying, like, no, we shouldn't do that. But we need to recognize that we both are pursuing a better community. So why did someone go out there in protest in the middle of the summer in a hot day while they can stay with their family. So, and I'm going to try to connect to other things. Early on, someone called Eugenia was talking about poisoning water, that she have to filter the water in order to drink. And now I'm going to try to even connect even more points. Earlier in the meeting, we also talk about COVID issues. So imagine for a second, instead of keep putting resources that when people is almost lost and they don't have anything else and they have to go on protest because they cannot take it anymore. And we are deciding here if we're going to give resources, if we're going to throw bullets at them, if we're going to throw chemical weapons at them, what are we going to do with that people? Why? Imagine if we start discussing like, how are we going to clean the water for Eugenia? How are we going to make a better life for the people with COVID or with the homeless people? And I think we have that in common. That if we both explore a little bit deeper, then should we put more money into this or that? And we start asking question, why is these people getting COVID? Why is these people constantly homeless? Why is people willing to break a window? What is happening in that life? And we start addressing the situation in their life, we might be able.
Okay, your 3 minutes are up for the public speaker.
Thank you. Next speaker. And Stefan, after this speaker, tell me how much time we have left because we have one more item. Go ahead, next speaker.
It would be Allison Bell-Byrne, registered in opposition, wishing to speak.
So it looks like we don't have someone by that name currently on our attendees list, as well as Lauren Byrne, registered opposed, wishing to speak, is not present with us, as well as Amy Owen, who is registered opposed, wishing to speak, not with us. It looks like we do have Alexandra Wilburn, registered opposed, wishing to speak. Chair, we have about 18 minutes until the live stream stops.
Okay. Okay, let's have the next speaker and then we'll go right into item 7.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much, President Carter. And tech facilitators. I have spoken and I've testified to my experiences to that evening almost like about 9-10 months ago about being tear gassed. But here I'm just going to, medical science says don't use tear gas. Environmental science says don't use tear gas. Immoral ethical academics from a philosophical standpoint would say it is morally wrong for them to use tear gas. I again oppose the very fact that the police were going to do their own investigation of themselves. That categorically doesn't make sense. And the fact that we continue to use these practices just because we always have doesn't mean we should continue. And yeah, just the report that they did means nothing. It was a waste of time and energy unless you want to see how someone who uses abusive behavior, the policing institution, excuses their behavior because, that's how we learn to deal with the situation. They learn to deal with these situations from a structure that was built by white supremacists. Tear gas has historically been used, in the original civil rights movement. Before that, in workers' movements in the early 1900s, it's clear that it is purely an oppressive state authoritarian tactic. And just does not need to move forward. Thank you very much. I yield the rest of my time. Rest in peace, Tony Robinson. As we're talking about the police, Matt Kenny should be fired and convicted. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You want the next speaker, Alder Carter?
Yes.
Ms. K. Galuska, registered in opposition, wishing to speak.
Looks like Kay Galuska is not with us in the attendees list.
The next speaker would be Bob Schaefer, neither support nor oppose, wishing to speak.
Bob, you should have a prompt to unmute yourself.
Yep, I already did that. Thank you. It has been an interesting time. First of all, I'm going to say that I support you accepting the police report. They have just identified, their usage and so forth. One of the things that has been interesting is the usage of tear gas is obviously not a desired option because of the harmful effects that it has. I know that I experienced it when I was in the service. We all had to go through that. The thing that hasn't been discussed is while we do have a right to free speech, while we do have a right to assembly, while we do have a right to protest, that those rights do not imply that anything goes and that all actions taken as a result of that are the right actions. That when people choose to protest and they choose an area that is heavily populated and they know that they're going to have people who are not going to listen to the orders of the police, that then they also need to be held at fault for those people being subject to tear gas. We have not addressed that issue. That when we look at it and people who are responsible for organizing those rights to protest and free speech, that they need to pick areas that are not going to put other people at risk if there's a situation where people who are not going to follow the rules have to be in some way or another brought under control. Now, that other places have brought out the fire department and hosed people down, and people have been trampled over, and people have been hurt in those situations as well. So this is not an easy situation to deal with, and I think that what we need to do is we need to work on building respect, and we need to work on protesting in a manner that does not create violence. That and those are all the things that we need to work on. And I think the council needs to look at some places of where they can have peaceful protest. Having people invade people's yards and homes is not a respectful thing to do. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Gregory Gelem, neither support nor oppose, and wishing to speak.
Gregory, you should have a prompt to unmute yourself. Should be somewhere on your screen. There you go.
Okay. Can people hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name's Gregory Gelem, he, him. I was there on the night, I believe it's the 30th, when tear gas was deployed by the police. I was there for. I was there. I'm a volunteer reporter for WRT FM. I was hit twice by tear gas. Once from a matter of just a few feet. There was a lot of violence there. I witnessed a lot of violence. All the violence was committed by the police. I've heard again and again tonight about the so-called violent protests and all. There was a line of police in riot gear blocking the street. There was a crowd in the street who were upset, but were not attacking police, attacking each other, or anything like that. I went up. I was there with a cell phone trying to record audio. I gotta say, my audio didn't turn out too well. I got a lot of audio of me hacking, but there was, even from a layman's perspective, it was quite obvious that the use of tear gas was not to stop violence or anything like this. It was a means of the police asserting, all I can say is like trying to assert dominance over a place where they felt annoyed that people were there. I don't know any other way to explain it. They were using a weapon of war to real indiscriminately, and they're based on. I hope everyone reads Dr. Gelem's report, his letter, which describes objectively and rationally how tear gas should be used when it's allowed. It's in very rare cases. It's not used by many police departments all over the world. It has international restrictions on it. None of these were followed on the day I witnessed it and got hit. And again, I was armed with a cell phone, and I'm older. I got gray hair.
I'm sorry, but the 3 minutes are up for this speaker.
Thank you, Greg. Is Greg our last speaker?
We have two more. Catherine McComb.
Where are we with time, Stefan?
About 8 minutes till we stop live streaming.
And we have how many more speakers? Because we still want to hear from Alder Kimball.
We have Catherine McComb registered in support and wishing to speak. And the speaker after her is Catherine Johnson, registered in opposition and wishing to speak.
Okay, go ahead.
Catherine, you're unmuted.
Hi, thank you. Less lethal tools like tear gas are a direct response to public outcry against police use of deadly force. The ad hoc committee itself in recommendation 127 says, quote, MPD should consider acquisition and training in addition. Well-developed, less lethal tools such as newer options for chemical sprays and better, safer kinetic weapons, unquote. MPD's 2020 and 2021 capital budget includes funding for increased, less lethal capacity. One objective is to equip each of MPD's primary response vehicles with a less lethal launcher. This would increase the likelihood that this tool would be available when needed in a crisis, reducing the chances for an avoidable deadly force encounter. Isn't that what most of us want? Back in October, a proposal was made to ban MPD from using tear gas, pepper spray, and impact mutations. This seems counterintuitive to our current national outcry. If we take away less lethal tools, what does that leave our officers to work with? It only makes sense to provide as many non-lethal options as possible as they work to keep our city and its residents safe. Though CF is definitely uncomfortable, it is very rarely causes any lasting effects, especially when used outdoors. It is almost always possible to avoid an encounter with CS by voluntarily dispersing when an unlawful assembly is announced, by following curfew orders, and by cooperating with officers. Our officers are there to keep the peace and protect people and property from harm. I strongly support the MPD's report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next registrant is Catherine Johnson, registered in opposition and wishing to speak.
Go ahead.
Catherine, you're unmuted. You're showing is unmuted on our end. Maybe verify that any microphone you might be using isn't muted. Okay. Looks like we're having a technical issue.
Okay. Well, we're going to need to go forward. If she gets it resolved, we'll
Hello?
circle.
Oh, there we go. Catherine?
Okay. All right, cool. I just turned it off and back on. All right. My name is Catherine Johnson, and I have been present at as many protests as I could possibly be. And I've been tear gassed numerous times. I can personally say from personal experience that the numbers on that report and what a number of people have stated from that report are wrong. And I would like to talk about my personal experience being tear gassed briefly. So I was completely a peaceful protester. I can also say that, echoing a couple of other people's comments, tear gas only causes further chaos. It causes further injury. I've heard from a houseless woman who is living on State Street who was trampled. That wasn't something that happened with protesters before tear gas was happening, before people were scared, before people were injured. I've helped treat other people using water to wash out their eyes when they were tear gassed. It causes panic, it causes injury, it injures people inside homes who are not part of this at all, which is not the responsibility of protesters. That was incited by police in response to no violence. Anger, hurt, damage happens after the police incite stuff. I've also seen the idea that police using less lethal things means that they don't use lethal ones or don't use aggressive force. I have seen people beaten by cops in Madison on numerous occasions, often under the guise of tear gas or the cover of tear gas. So in that chaos, being able to beat people not on camera. So personally, my experience, I've been tear gassed a number of times, pretty heavily, a couple of times, and my lungs are not the same as they were. They're far more sensitive to smoke. They're sensitive to environmental changes, which they were never before. And during COVID, that definitely puts me at a greater risk were I to contract COVID. And I know that's true of many other people. As was stated, the developed cases of asthma. I know people who have also had nerve damage. I know people who have personally experienced what has been discussed and reported and studied, differences in menstrual cycle, that can't be good. And we don't even know fully what the long-term effects of tear gas are. My friend was in her home on Henry. The protest didn't start there. The police forced protesters into those residential areas using tear gas, using brutality. And my friend has damaged lungs already, and she was trapped in her home, unable to get away from that tear gas. And that's been true of a number of other occasions. I would also like to point out—
sorry, but the time is up for this speaker.
Thank you, Catherine. I know we have a few minutes. Stefan, I kind of lost you on the screen. Right. Lisa, is there any way, and everyone can voice their opinion on this, but is there any way that we can do a council discussion this week? I really want to hear the details of number 7, and we don't have time. I think we have like 2 minutes, and it deserves more than 2 minutes, that's for sure.
I can schedule a Common Council discussion on those items if you wish. It's up to the body, I guess.
Is everyone amenable to that for Thursday? That Lisa can go ahead and see if we can hold that meeting.
Right. So we did cancel, just so you know, we did cancel the Common Council Committee of the Whole meeting.
Right.
For Thursday. So this would just be a Common Council discussion to
correct
talk about agenda item number 7 on tonight's meeting agenda.
Just to clarify, we're just